Okay, hi everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and give everyone like 1 to 2 minutes to kind of have a chance to drop in before I go and get started. So I'll probably say that I'll start at like 2:01 or 2:02 time frame. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. It seems like I don't see anyone else kind of coming in, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get started today. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Um, please let me know if you can't. Okay, gonna go ahead and start. Awesome. So hi everyone, and thank you for joining Statistics Solutions webinar on addressing feedback, getting through the feedback quickly and efficiently. My name is Kai, and I am a quantitative consultant or a quantitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. So this webinar is being recorded and you should have access to it about 24 to, I believe, 48 hours, somewhere in there, right? 24 to 48 hours between now or between when the call ends and when you should receive the recording to this call. Additionally, I have a section at the end for questions and answers. So if you do have any questions throughout, please go ahead and either put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A box on Zoom. And I will go ahead and get to those questions kind of at the end. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. I just got another call. I was just declining it. Okay, and then last thing I wanted to say is that please stick around to the very end of the PowerPoint. I have some information about our company, Statistics Solutions, and how we can help you with either addressing feedback or any other part of the dissertation process. And I'll get a little bit into that in a little bit. Okay. Oh, sorry. Anyway, so committee and chair feedback is an important step in the dissertation process. However, this process is often overlooked when students are planning for timelines, and addressing feedback can then become really overwhelming for a number of students. So in this webinar, we're going to discuss addressing feedback in a timely and efficient manner, some tips and tricks, and then we'll have, like I said, a little bit of time at the end to answer some questions. Okay. So while this first point may seem self-explanatory, the first thing that you should always do before starting the process of addressing comments is to thoroughly read through all of the feedback that you have been given. As you read through each comment, take notes on how you might attempt to address the feedback or write down any questions that you may have about what you're expected to do. What is important here is that you thoroughly understand the feedback that you have been given before attempting to fix it. That being said, don't be afraid to reach out to your chair or committee members don't be afraid to ask your chair or committee members questions. Another important thing is to stay organized. You should always be working on a different copy of the document so you don't lose comments later down the line. It can also be helpful for each new iteration of a draft to be saved so you can always go back and see the things that you changed. I'll get into it a little bit later, but another part of organization is something known as a change matrix. Like I said, we'll get into that a little bit later. It's very helpful though. Some professors, and it's important to stay organized and to be able to keep track of the changes that you've made, mostly because not a lot, but some professors will ask you, to take a paragraph out 1 month and then a couple of months down the line say, actually, why don't you add some information about this, this, and this? And like, lo and behold, it was a paragraph that you took out a couple months ago because they asked you to. It's not all the time that happens, but it does happen a lot more often than I think people think it does. And so having those previous versions of your drafts will really help you in the long run and make sure that you have all of your versions on hand and you're able to reference what you thought about doing before or what you did do before. So back to asking questions. Many students remark that they are hesitant to reach out to their chairperson for fear of looking silly or dumb. However, it can be really easy to misinterpret a comment on a Word document or an email. You might not know exactly what they're asking for, or it could be in, the form of a question when in reality they're asking you to add, a paragraph or something like that. I mean, unless it's, in person, a lot of the times these things do get lost in translation. And so therefore you're not going to look dumb when you ask questions. And as long as you're very, thorough about the questions that you're asking, you're asking it in a way where it's not just, hey, I don't understand this comment. Instead, you're asking, hey, in this comment, you're asking me to do this, this, and this, but I'm a little confused about this bullet point. What exactly are you asking me to add for this bullet point? Right? As long as you're being clear and specific about what you don't understand, then it's probably not a silly question. And the long of the short of it is that you are not going to be able to thoroughly understand or answer something, if you don't understand what is being asked of you. And that is part of your chair's job, is to guide you through this editing process. So while it may be daunting, as like I said, as long as you're being clear with what you don't understand, it really is encouraged to reach out to your chair member with questions. Sorry, I was just taking a sip of water. But once you feel as though you fully understand the content of the feedback that you've been given, you can now spend your time addressing each comment one by one. So you want to make sure to thoroughly address each comment, as you don't want your chair or committee members to have to ask you to make the same changes multiple times. Additionally, you want to add as much detail as you can when addressing each point. And this is because it's always easier to take out information than it is to add more later. So if your professor asks you, add more information about the descriptive statistics, you can write a couple different sentences on what descriptive statistics are, why you're using it, what specific descriptive statistics did you use, and then you can, actually add a little bit more information. And that way, when you're sending it back to them, they look through it and they go, wow, you really added a lot of information. Maybe you don't need this part, or maybe you don't need this part, but you have the meat of what I was asking for. So sometimes, even if you have asked your chair clarifying questions, you may have to push back on mentors' feedback. So this can be incredibly nerve-wracking, but sometimes it is very necessary. So while this is not the case for every chairperson or committee member, certain feedback might not always be helpful or appropriate for your study. For example, if you're running a qualitative study and your committee member asks you about descriptive statistics, that's, unless you had already included descriptive statistics in your interview, that's not really appropriate for a qualitative survey, since descriptive statistics is a quantitative analysis. Alternatively, sometimes the comments that are made are just nitpicky, arbitrary, or actually not within the scope of your study. And so a lot of the times committee members and professors will make comments just for the sake of making comments sometimes. I think I remember for my thesis, my master's thesis, I was doing, a study on memory and misinformation with stress specifically. And I think one of my committee members at one point asked me why I wasn't looking at stress and like other types of emotions. I think anger was in there, sadness, stuff like that. And I literally had to go back to him and say, hey, I think these are really good comments. I think that, you have a good idea going on, but I also want to graduate. And a good dissertation is a done dissertation, right? And so I had to push back and say, I understand where you're coming from here. I think these are good ideas and we can definitely look into them later, and I can put those in my comments for future research, but that's just not within the scope of this current study. And that's totally fine to do, as long as you have a good justifiable reason for why you don't want to do something, or you don't want to include some sort of comment that they added. At the end of the day, it is your dissertation, and you shouldn't let any feedback drive you into a place where you either don't understand what's going on or you feel uncomfortable defending yourself. Ultimately, barring any large and glaring issues, as long as you have a justifiable reason for why you're making the decision that you are, your committee members are most likely going to agree with you. However, that being said, it is important to push back on feedback in a respectful manner, rather than getting defensive and possibly lashing out. So it's a good idea to keep an open and professional line of communication between you and your committee members. That way, someone's not adding some sort of feedback that you then get defensive about and then lash back out at a professor and they go, whoa, that's not what I meant. Because, as we talked about earlier, comments are not always going to line up with people's actual feelings. And sometimes I'm sure you've all read an email that sounds kind of rude. And then when you actually talk to the person in person, they're not rude at all. That's how the email came out. And so it's really important to make sure that you're, like I said, keeping those open and professional dialogues with your committee. Tell them that you appreciate the feedback where it's coming from, but that it is either not appropriate for your study, not within the scope of your study, or, not something that you're looking to, or, something that's nitpicky, arbitrary, not something that you're looking to fix right now. Okay. Another roadblock. Sorry, y'all. I can speak today, I promise. Another roadblock that you may run into during the editing process is incongruent feedback. Sometimes you'll find that your chair and your committee member, or one of your committee members versus another committee member, are at odds regarding the changes that they think should be done. This is where you need to talk to your chair. Your chair is your advocate, and they are your first and last line of defense against your committee. Discuss with your chairperson which feedback you think is the most appropriate for your study, and your chair can then speak with the other committees from there. Alternatively, your chair may ask you to explain the reasoning to each committee member, but only do this if you are asked to by your chair, because sometimes it can come off as disrespectful. And so a good example of this is that, sometimes your chair is asking you, why aren't you running a paired samples t-test? Why did you run an ANOVA instead? And then your committee member will say, actually, I think ANOVA is the more appropriate measure rather than a paired samples t-test. Maybe you're running a repeated measures ANOVA, something like that. And, you look through both of the feedbacks and you go, okay, well, these are helpful, but also my chair is saying one thing and my committee member is saying another. That's when you decide what you think is best for your study. So if you think that an ANOVA is the more appropriate analysis for your study, as long as you, like I said, as long as you have that information and your reasoning to back up why you're choosing what you're choosing, most of the time your professors are not going to have a hard time with it. But like I said, in that case, your chair is saying one thing, your committee member is saying another. You would then go to your chair and say, hey, look, I know you said this and this person said this, but I'm actually thinking that what the other person said was right for my study. Here's why. And then your chair will either, agree with you, talk to you a little bit more about maybe why they think their feedback is better. Ultimately, you and your chair are the first and last line of defense. Your chair is your person here. And ultimately, they should be in service of you graduating and you feeling comfortable with your dissertation or your thesis. And so it is important to be able to ask your chair for help and have them to advocate for you. Okay. So this is the information that I kind of wanted to talk about in terms of change matrices and indicating your changes, right? So some chairs do not have specific instructions for this, while others do. So I would check with your chair to see if you have any specific instructions to create some sort of change matrix or, a document that tracks your changes. And so like I was saying earlier, it is really important to track your changes, not just because it gives you the ability to look back at what you have done in the past, what has been changed, but it also gives your committee and chair members an ability to look back at what has been done in the past and see what has changed. That way, not only are you not answering questions multiple times, the same question multiple times, they're also not asking you the same question multiple times because they don't know what's been asked and what's not been asked. And so some really good ways of indicating changes are using tracked changes or just highlighting your changes in each iteration of your draft. Word has tracked changes, which is really helpful because it can indicate, what has actually been changed, and you can accept and reject specific changes. Same with highlighting, it's very helpful because you're very visually able to see what's changing actually in the document itself. If you do want to do this, I recommend doing multiple iterations of the draft, meaning that you have your initial draft, you send it out to your chair, they give you some feedback, you then edit that document as a separate saved document. That way you have your original draft and then you have the edited document, and those are two separate documents. That way, and then you just keep doing that with each iteration, each feedback. Every time you do it, you're going to create a new save as file. That's the best way to use track changes and highlighting. Alternatively, there is something known as a change matrix, and change matrices are incredibly helpful. So a lot of the times they're just an Excel document or maybe a Word document with a table of some kind. And basically, each column is something along the lines of, maybe the first column of your table is, which person made the feedback, which committee member was it? Was it your chair? Was it Dr. So-and-so? Was it Dr. Other person? Something like that. Next should be the date in which that change was requested, in which the feedback was given to you, right? Then after that, have a column for whether or not that change has actually been made yet. Another column after that with the date that change has been made. And then finally, maybe a column after that looks at, do you have any additional comments? Do you have any additional questions? And then a lot of people share this document with all of their committee members and their chair so that they and all of their chair members and committee members are able to look back and see, okay, well, Dr. So-and-so requested that you put a little bit more information about your participants in chapter 3. And they asked it on September 5th, 2021. That's a really weird date. I don't know why just made that up. And then next you would say, yes, I did complete this change. I completed this change on September 15th, 2021, something like that, right? And then under additional comments, you could say, is there anything else that you want me to add? And that way your committee member or whoever made that feedback is able to look in there, see that you've made the change, and then under additional comments, see if there's anything else that you would need help with. And so indicating changes is really helpful. I recommend it all the time. Whether or not you do a change matrix, you should at least be tracking your changes or highlighting or just saving multiple versions of your draft. Like I said earlier, it really helps for later down the line if somebody tells you, hey, what was that thing that you had written in your earlier draft? Why don't we add that back in? And then if you don't have the earlier draft, you're kind of screwed. And you're gonna have to rewrite something, and no one wants to do that. I'm sure you don't. And so, like I said, tracking changes, great. Okay. So another important tip for the feedback process is to make sure that you are using all of the resources available to you. Many school libraries have librarians or research assistants to help you, and that includes with helping with writing if your library has a writing center, or pointing you in the direction of appropriate databases. So when I was in grad school, I worked at the library at my master's program, and it was awesome. I helped a lot of students with, finding databases, finding research. I never helped with the writing center or anything like that, but we did have one. And I just know that it was really helpful for not just graduate students, but for undergraduates as well. And so, sorry, not just undergraduates, but graduates as well. I think a lot of people use the library a lot when they're an undergraduate. And then maybe, they use the library to study in graduate school, but they don't use the resources of the library as much. And so it is really important to ask your librarians. They're there to help you. That's what they're there for. And I'm sure they'd be happy to help you find a database. Additionally, editing services such as our company, Statistics Solutions, we're paid to help with APA editing, feedback, general committee feedback, all of that. And so, you can always come to people like us. And then finally, your peers and your cohort members are always a good resource for bouncing ideas off of one another, and as well as for editing help. Obviously, as long as you're not cheating off of one another, plagiarizing each other, doing some unethical things, there is nothing wrong with communicating with your peers and your cohort members. And it's actually really encouraged to do so. You guys are all, in the same program, going through it together. I'm sure that if you're not asking questions, there are other people in your cohort or your peers who are also not asking questions, and they're probably just as confused as you are. And once you go, hey, my committee member sent me this one piece of feedback and I just don't understand what they're asking. Could you maybe take a look at it and see if you can glean what they want out of this? That is a perfectly acceptable thing to do with your peers and cohort members. And unless they're jerks who don't want to help you, I'm sure that most people would be super happy to bounce ideas off of each other. And then finally, it's really important to be timely with your feedback. It takes time to diligently address feedback for a section of a paper or a proposal to be reviewed. And it also takes time for the proposal to actually be reviewed by your committee. And so before starting this feedback process, ask your mentor, ask your chair people, ask your committee members talk to them about your deadline and ask them how much they would need to be able to provide a review. Overall, try to be mindful of your timeline so that you do not get stuck making major revisions at the end with a very unrealistic timeline. Okay. And so that's kind of all of the baseline information that I had for all today. So then we're going to get into the question and answer section. I'm going to take a sip of water first real quick, and then I will go ahead and get into it. Okay, let's see. Okay, got a couple questions. So for the change matrices, is there a template or sample about how this may appear? Is there a guide that one may read up on change matrices? Actually, yeah, I think that our company, Statistics Solutions, has a blog post about change matrices that's up on our website that does have an example of a template to use. That being said, I could also probably find one on my computer real quick and then share my screen again in a couple of minutes, and I can definitely do that. But let me get through the other questions first before I do that. Yeah, in regards to track changes, I've noticed that it gets very convoluted, especially when using Google Docs. Yeah, I never suggest using Google Docs. What are some tips to stop with confusion associated? I can see adding dates and titles, but that doesn't work for Google Docs because I've attempted to do so. Yeah, so I kind of hate Google Docs. It's kind of the bane of my existence, and I will attack it at any time. Mostly just because of that exact reason that you're talking about. It can get incredibly convoluted to look at the track changes on Google Docs, and sometimes you end up more confused than you were in the first place. That being said, it does kind of come back to what I was saying earlier. If you are like really gung-ho about using Google Docs, I get it. You know, it's easy. It's probably cheaper than Word. And you know, and you're able to use it online, and you don't have to be directly on the individual computer that you're writing the document on. So I totally get why you want to use Google Docs. In terms of kind of solutions a way around that, basically, like I was saying earlier, I would save each iteration of your draft. So you get a feedback, you track your changes, and then you do save as, and you completely start a new document, you know, with all of the changes answered, and then none of that feedback in. Basically, you'll have two separate documents, one document with all of the feedback changes where the changes are actually tracked, and then another document where those changes are not tracked, and all of them are basically fixed, and it's like a final version of your document. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I do, like I said, I do recommend not using Google Docs if you can. But if you have to use Google Docs, I would just make a million different documents so that you're able to track your changes. That way, you know, you're able to label, you know, document 1, it could be initial draft on this date, at last edits made on this date, and that can like literally be the title of your draft. And then the next draft will be, you know, draft 2, feedback given on this date, changes made on this date, stuff like that, right? And so making actual date changes in within the documents rather than within the track changes in Google Docs. Okay, how can a researcher satisfy the committee that you have to fulfill a literature gap? Should they try to give a reference of other studies? Yes. So if your committee member is asking you that you need to fill a gap in the literature, then yeah, the best thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to a bunch of different studies, references, sources, and you're going to read through all of them, and you're going to basically take notes and find central themes. You're going to look at what are all of these documents testing, what are they all, you know, what are all these research studies looking at, what are the purpose of them, what are the results, and what are the variables that they were looking at. And by going through a bunch of different research articles with this lens in mind, you're going to be able to narrow down that there are some variables that these studies are probably not looking at. So for a good example, like I said earlier, my master's thesis was stress and misinformation and memory. And specifically, I looked up a lot of misinformation studies, and I found that a lot of misinformation was done just as base misinformation. And then it was also done with emotions. So it was done with, you know, happy emotions, sad emotions, but I didn't see a lot of misinformation paradigms being conducted with stress as an independent variable. So whether or not people were experiencing stress. And so that was my gap in the literature that I filled. I said, oh, wow, no one has looked at stress and misinformation before. That's really weird. And I mean, I think people had looked at stress and misinformation. I found like a very niche gap in the literature that I'm sure probably was silly looking back at it now, but not the point, right? And so long story short, like the long way to answer that question is that yes, you should give reference for other studies. Mostly you're going to look at those other studies and you're going to sift through them to see if there's anything that they might have missed. I hope that makes sense. Please let me know if it doesn't. I can try to answer it a little bit differently, but let me really quickly get to the last slide, and then I will Yeah. Here, let me finish what I was about to say, and then I will go ahead and okay. So somebody asked, can you repeat what you'd look at for the gaps question? Yeah, absolutely. So basically for gaps in literature, if you're looking for gaps in literature, what you're going to do is you're going to basically pick a question or some sort of topic, right? So like I said, mine was the misinformation paradigm. I was really interested in what it took for people to believe misinformation. And so I started looking through all of the studies that I could find that had anything to do with misinformation and emotion, because that was, like I said, specifically what I was interested in looking at. I basically took really detailed notes of each research paper that I created. I think I created some sort of Excel document, and I wrote down, the article titles, what the purpose of each article was, what the variables for each article was, and what the findings for each article was. And then I went through and I basically compared and contrasted all of the articles together. I looked at a lot of the articles' future decisions or possible future research sections, where they give you examples of what you could do to expand this research. And a lot of the times you can find gaps in the literature doing stuff like that. But ultimately you compare and contrast all of the studies that you're able to find on the topic that you're interested in. And usually you'll find something along the lines of, oh, wow, they've looked at this variable, this variable, this variable, and this variable, but they've never looked at this variable in relation to these other things. And it could be that you maybe not have found other studies like that. And that if that's the case, then you kind of go back to your search. So literature searches are kind of a inductive thing that you kind of do over time. And so, once you think you found a gap in the literature, you're probably going to have to do a little bit more research to make sure that it actually is a gap in the literature. And then if you actually, can't find anything else on that, then you can kind of go ahead with that gap in the literature. But then maybe sometimes you go, oh, wow, that actually isn't a gap in the literature. I found some other research on it. Let's keep looking, basically. But yeah, it can be a little difficult sometimes with literature, literature researches, but that is something that we as a company help for. Not me specifically. I don't do that often. But we have great people here who do actually help with literature searches. Like my coworker's name is Tom. He's awesome. He loves looking through literature. It's like his favorite thing to do. So we absolutely have people that help with that. Next question. Can we claim that my study is the first in this area? Yeah, I guess like I said, it does depend. And I know that answer kind of sucks. I hate it depends answers, but it kind of does depend. If honestly it is the first in that area, you found a gap in the literature, you can absolutely claim that it was the first in that area. I believe that with my master's thesis, I did claim that it was the first that had looked at stressor timing in relationship to misinformation and the misinformation paradigm. And I had not previously found any literature that had done anything similar that I was doing. So I was able to claim that it was the first study in that area. But like I said, I would be hesitant about making that claim unless you're absolutely certain that it is, the first in that area of research. What are the key terms when searching for tracked changes to be familiar? And what are Google search terms to find templates for change matrices? Yeah, so I don't have the blog link right off the top of my head, but if you do, or for that last question, finally, what's the link to the blog to read on Statistics Solutions page? But if you do go to statisticsolutions.com and then go to blogs, you can search it. And I do think it's called The Importance of Change Matrices or something like that. Or like tracking your changes, the importance of change matrix, of using a change matrix, something like that. But if you search change matrix, it should be able to come up. That being said, I'm not sure if it's been posted yet. I know that the blog was written a couple weeks ago, so I assume it was posted, but I'm not in charge of that. And then other questions, and then what are templates for change matrices? Honestly, if you just look up change matrices, you should be able to find something. Like I said, I do want to really quickly see if I can find the change matrix template that I created for my clients. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Let me get through this last slide about talking about statistic solutions, and then I'll show you that. Okay. Here, I'm gonna get back to the questions in just one second. But basically, Statistic Solutions, we're a full service dissertation consulting company. We provide graduate students with timely editorial support for your dissertations and scholarly projects. Basically, we help with everything from chapter 1 to chapter 5. So chapter 1 being topic creation, topic development, chapter 2 being literature review, chapter 3 being methodology, 4 being results, and 5 being conclusion. We also help with survey creation. Well, survey finding surveys, like, and then survey upload. We also help with addressing committee feedback, APA feedback, all that fun stuff. If you are interested in our services, we do have a 30-minute consultation Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Eastern time. And if you are interested, I'm going to leave that information up on the screen for a couple more minutes. I want to find my change matrix template really quickly. And then how do you book me and Tom? That's a funny question. Yeah, absolutely. You're totally welcome to talk, say, my name, I'm Kai. You can talk about me specifically if you would like. I don't necessarily work a lot with the chapter 1, chapter 2 stuff. I work a lot with chapter 3, chapter 4. I do a lot of the statistics and stuff like that. But Tom is awesome, and so you could either ask for me or ask for Tom. And I'm sure that if we're available, we'd be happy to help you. So let me just really quickly share my example of a change matrix. So this is kind of a very bare bones example, but this is just what I like to show clients as a kind of example of what you could make your change matrix look like. So for one, up at the top, we have, we have what number feedback are we on? Then we have what is the actual feedback or comments. We then have who's the reviewer, what date it was received, how was the comment resolved, the date it was resolved, and then any additional comments or questions, right? And then I love to color code my change matrix just because I like to color code everything on the planet. And so I had green, meaning that like the comments were resolved. Yellow is that the comments are in the process of being resolved. And then red is that the comment has not been resolved yet. And so I'll just keep this up on the screen for a second while I go through the other questions. Yeah. Okay. So can you conduct a webinar about statistics tests that mostly use in thesis writing? Yeah, absolutely. I believe we do have a webinar on that. I think it's like, I don't remember what exactly it's called. But I think one of my coworkers does something similar to that. Where it's like coming up with research questions, analyses that are related to those research questions, and then reporting those results. I believe we do have a webinar about that. We do post our webinar schedule super far in advance. But if that is something that you have, a question about a webinar that we could do, and you don't see it coming up, please feel free to, reach out and ask at that same email that I showed earlier, which I'll put back on the screen in a minute or two. And then just ask if that's a webinar that we're willing to do in the future. I think right now our webinar schedule is out until like October, that we've had it planned. But then after that, it's free reign of what we do. And then I want to get back to some of the longer questions I saw earlier. Yeah, you just responded to literature gaps, stating that students are recommend to scour the literature to see with a particular lens. How are central themes a way to identify? Is there So these are really great questions. And I really do appreciate them. They're definitely not in the scope of this, this webinar. I think this gets a little bit more into actual literature reviews and kind of looking for stuff like that, which is super fair. We do, I believe, either have webinars about that, or you can talk to my boss, Janine, about working with Tom to do some literature reviews, because he has probably a lot more information on how to come up with the central themes, come up with information to kind of keep going, right? But off the top of my head, in terms of coming up with central themes, once you fully, you do have to come up with a topic first, something that you're interested in. At the very least, I can't help you with that one. You know what I mean? Like, you have to come up with something that you're interested in studying, that you think would be important to study, right? And then from there, you're gonna start just literally going into databases and searching those initial terms that you first came up with. From there, a lot of the additional search terms that you're going to get are actually in the abstracts of other literature. So other literature will include, key terms and phrases in the abstract, and those can actually be used as search terms. So a key term or phrase could be, memory and emotion, or it could be, stressor timing, something like that, right? And if that's in an abstract of an article that you see that you're interested in, you can use that as an additional search term to kind of look up other articles. Additionally, looking at articles that other people have cited within the articles that you're interested in. So say you're reading an article, you're like, wow, this is really interesting, I want to know more about this. Go down to the reference section, find other articles that are similar, because chances are there are going to be a lot of them. And so that's definitely a really good step. Okay. And then I've left this up on the screen for a little bit of time. I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understands what the change matrix looks like. But I also, want everyone to have access to this information here. Okay. So yeah, like I said, if you are interested in working with us, if you do want to work with me or Tom, please go ahead and contact Janine. It's at janine@statisticsolutions.com. Her phone number is there as well. She is our sales manager. She is awesome and such a fun person to talk to. So she will be able to kind of help you out. If you do want to work with me, or you want to work with Tom, or you want to work with someone specific, go ahead and just mention that to her, that you were in this webinar and that you're interested in working with someone specific. But yeah, absolutely, I'll keep this information up on the screen for just a couple more minutes. And I just want to make sure that I answered all of the questions. Awesome. Yeah, I think I answered all the questions, but please let me know if I didn't. I'm going to stay on for like a couple more minutes, but that is actually all of the information that I have for y'all. I do really appreciate everyone being here and asking these really insightful questions. Some of y'all have really good questions, and I do apologize if I'm not able to answer some of them in super depth, just because they're not necessarily in the scope of what I normally do on a day-to-day basis. But I do think that it's nice that you're asking these questions for sure. Oops, sorry. Thank you. I always leave empowered. That makes me so happy to hear, to be honest with you. That is what I hope to do, honestly, with my clients. At the end of the day, y'all, this is your dissertation. This is your study. This is your baby. This is your this is your little brainchild that you've been working on for, X amount of months to X amount of years. And so at the end of the day, you are going to be the relative expert of your study. Whether or not you're working with people who are experts in their field, chances are, especially if you're looking for gaps in literature, chances are that they're actually not going to be experts on what you're specifically looking at. And so feedback is super important in the process, but also so is, sticking to what you originally planned and sticking to your guns. And so, that's why I say, don't be afraid to push back on feedback. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid of incongruent feedback, because at the end of the day, it's your dissertation. You're the one making the decisions. And yeah, I really hope this helped everyone. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the screen, but I'll keep answering questions if anyone has them. I'll probably stick on here for like another 1 to 2 minutes unless anyone asks another question. And then obviously I'll stay a little bit longer. Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for your comprehensive questions. I think, like I said, everyone asked really great questions today, and I do really appreciate when people are involved in these meetings. So thank you so much. I really appreciate y'all. Okay. Seems like everyone's getting off and nobody else is asking any questions. But if you do have any other questions, you do have Janine's information, so please let me know, or please let her know if you do have any questions. And then hopefully I'll be working with some of y'all soon. I hope everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday. And like I said, I hope to be speaking with some of you in the future.